Okay, good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Failing to Test and Learn. Um, Today we have our guest, Deborah Pickfield, who I will introduce in a moment. The session is entitled Failing to Test and Learn, Why Ideas Aren't the Problem. And you'll note a couple of other things on the slide there, which I'll talk about in a second. So across more than 10,000 organizations, one capability stands out. Organizations with strong experimentational capability are 13 times more likely to be top performers. Yet fewer than 8% of organizations do experimentation systematically. Today, we're going to explore why. Research tells us that iterating, testing, and piloting innovative ideas is key to lowering risk. Gaining insight, cutting costs, and boosting adaptability. These practices, when embedded in the innovation system, allow for continuous improvement by testing small, manageable versions of an idea, learning from failures, and adjusting before a full-scale launch. This cycle of build, test, and refine helps teams to identify problems early, build better solutions, and pivot effectively when needed, fostering robust innovation and better outcomes. It also enables teams to embrace uncertainty, that's that perceived risk that everybody talks about, and to apply these testing techniques to far more uncertain situations. Surprisingly, many of these practices are not followed. Despite the buzz around the fail fast culture, only 23% of organizations conduct regular A/B tests on new innovations, with 55% pilot testing innovations. So fewer than half have a formal process to prototype ideas or a methodology to test and fix errors early. Strong experimentation capability, again, is 13 times more common in top performers, and it's nearly absent outside of that group. This is strikingly counterintuitive because one would assume that most firms rigorously experiment before launch, yet the data shows a major gap. Many organizations launch uh, products without robust testing, relying more on a gut feel than formal feedback. So now let me introduce our guest, Deborah Pickfield of ThinkSpot. Deborah is the principal there and also an Innovation360 practitioner based in Toronto, Canada, and has been looking at innovation capability and the failure of organizations to test and learn. So first, Deborah, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Gerry. It's great to be here talking about the work that you and I both love, strengthening the performance of teams and organizations by introducing new ways of doing things. I became passionate about innovation about 20 years ago during my MBA and realizing the impact innovation had on people's lives was huge. As I like to frame it, when we create solid innovation processes, we create good jobs, which creates good paychecks, which creates opportunities for people.
So welcome, Deborah. So let's do a quick run through of our agenda. We'll start with why experimentation is a critical part of the innovation journey. Then we'll talk about what we mean by experimentation and introduce you to Innovation360's Business Experimentation Guide and its 4 levels of maturity. We'll talk about our view that experimentation is about learning and what leaders should do to improve performance in their organizations. And finally, time dependent, we'll take some questions about our final message. And as we go through today's agenda, please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat, and we'll do our best to address as many as we can at the end of the session. One thing I wanted to point out is at the end of the session, we'll provide a free code, or actually 2 free codes, one for each of the 2 courses on our My360 platform that you can take the courses to sort of further explore some of the issues that we will talk about. So stay tuned for that coming soon in today's session. So Deborah, I'd like to start our discussion with something that you've been saying that most companies don't have an idea problem, but instead they have a learning problem. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's interesting, Jerry. The first time I heard someone say, and this is about 10 years ago, most companies don't have an idea problem, it surprised me, but it also resonated. Ideas are rarely the issue. Most organizations have more ideas than they know what to do with. The challenge is turning those ideas into something valuable and reducing the uncertainty that surrounds them. That's why I I often say innovation isn't primarily a creativity problem, but it's a learning problem. So many organizations assume they already know the answer. They jump straight to solutions without investing the time to understand the real problem, test their assumptions, or gather evidence. And that's where experimentation becomes so important. Experimentation is the discipline of reducing uncertainty, which is a huge issue, right? So it's how we learn what works, what doesn't, and why. And it helps us avoid investing significant time, money, and energy in ideas that only look good in theory. The organizations that consistently outperform aren't necessarily more creative, they're simply better at building learning into the innovation process. They test, they learn, they adapt, and they make decisions based on evidence rather than assumptions. And that's why I believe the real bottleneck isn't creativity, it's our ability to learn before we scale.
So innovation isn't about ideas, it's about evidence.
Exactly. Innovation is not an ideation problem. Again, it's a learning problem. And most organizations are not set up to learn. And from my perspective, it's due to a couple of simple beliefs. First, it's the lack of clarity regarding the investment, and I mean that word investment in time, required to learn and document. And secondly, a belief that no one else really can see the benefit like we can. There's an old proverb that says, go slow to go fast. And that's exactly what effective experimentation does. It creates a space to learn early so you can move faster and with greater confidence later. Over the 20 years I've been working with clients, it's amazing how many will say, we know what the problem is and we simply want to solve it. And then when you weave in a people-centered creative problem-solving process or hypothesis testing process, it often reveals something that takes the team in a different direction than they expected. So when you regard the understanding the why, the needs and benefits, what I've learned since becoming an I360 practitioner is unless you are prepared to be throwing good money out the window while risking something that you are convinced is a great idea, then you need to be testing all the way through the process. And I share these two thoughts since they reflect the people part of innovation and the need to invest time in exploring the real challenge or opportunity. For me, the fundamental premise that needs to start every opportunity or challenge, it's critical, and this is why I love I360, is to have a structured process and system that is woven into every idea journey.
But companies are doing a lot. They're doing workshops and hackathons and idea platforms, yada yada yada, right? Do you think that's an illusion?
I think that's a good way to describe it, and probably 100% correct. It is an illusion. The illusion that ideas are creativity. A lot of organizations think when they're busy, they're making progress. Like workshops can feel productive, roadmaps can look convincing, and pilots can create visibility. But it only matters if it produces evidence and improves certainty. If nothing changes based on what you learn, you're not experimenting, you're performing. And every step along the way is an opportunity and it's iterative and continually learning. So when you diverge and then converge on ideas, you expand and then you narrow down. When using scenario planning and hypotheses, evaluate and narrow down even more the risk and test out with potential clients and learn about risk. Is the idea being received well? And then continuously learn and document, share what has been learned.
So, what does real experimentation look like then?
Okay, that's a great question, Gerry, and it ties in really well with something that I've learned a lot from i360. This ties into what is critical for any idea. It's a structure and system, and I keep repeating those words, of evaluation, and at its core, it's built on three capabilities: prototyping, pilot testing, and an efficient test methodology. But most importantly, it's about a hypothesis-driven system. And the Innovation360 framework lays this out really well. You define hypotheses, you design experiments, you generate measurable evidence, and then you evaluate everything through three lenses. Are we solving a real problem? That's desirability. Feasibility, can we actually deliver it? And viability, does it create value?
So it's not just like try things and see what happens.
Not at all. It's disciplined, structured, repeatable, and that's exactly why many organizations avoid it. Because real experimentation exposes when you're wrong, and that's a hard thing to feel comfortable with. Yet if we flip this and see this as an opportunity to find things we don't expect, we realize that this is where the real learning comes in. One of my favorite quotes is from one of Canada's top economists, Todd Hirsch, and he shared a story of the creation of a well-known, ubiquitous product, WD-40, and it's such a great example of the first 39 tries that didn't work.
So I'm looking at experimentation. One thing I've always found interesting is that not all experiments are created equal. What do you think?
Yeah, most companies experiment, um, but very few do it well. To me, this is a huge opportunity to make a difference, right? When we invest in the capability to try, learn, repeat, then we'll have a huge impact on de-risking the initiative. I always love that word, de-risking. We can improve the outcomes for innovation efforts every time we become disciplined about experiments. Like many things in life, when we look at organizations, most don't lack experimentation entirely. That's what the data says, right? But they may be stuck in what could be called a fragmented stage. Some teams experiment sometimes, others don't. Learning isn't shared, decisions don't change. And experimentation alone is insufficient. The differentiator is whether organizations capture learning, reuse it, and act on it. It's important to operationalize learning through evidence collection, validation criteria, decision logic, and iteration loops where you're constantly learning through testing and feedback. Experimentation becomes significantly more effective when innovation is a priority supported by leadership. Why? Because systematic experimentation requires time, resources, governance, and permission to challenge assumptions. Without leadership support, experiments become symbolic, evidence gets ignored, and teams revert to opinion-based decisions. Experimentation is not a tool set, it's an organizational operating model. So you get effort, this experimentation guide that you talked about earlier. So you get effort, but not impact. So to help organizations organize their experimentation efforts and mitigate against all these issues, i360 developed a business experimentation guide. It defines 4 levels. Let's take a few minutes to go through all 4 levels. It's important to remember that each level reflects the potential maturity of an idea and helps to understand where an organization should begin. Is it level 1, 2, 3, or 4? And even though it might be tempting to skip a step or go to right to level 4. The guide's 4 levels are essentially a risk reduction ladder. They reflect the path that organizations need to follow when developing an innovative idea. So level 1, explore the problem. Level 2, does it matter enough? Do people care? Level 3, examine how it's being solved today. And finally, level 4 is, does your proposed solution actually work? So each level includes more than 10 suggested experiments that can be used to build out your ideas, with a total of 44 experiments across all 4 levels. Using the guide means identifying where you stand and then starting at the right juncture. So where are we in the innovation journey? It provides a guide to ask the right questions, suggested experiments to support that learning. Let's talk briefly about each level. So level 1 is the problem exploration. So it answers the question, do we understand the real problem? You may find that your initiative has moved past this stage and you'll be able to move more quickly to assess level 2. But what you want to do here is be like a detective, right? Talk to people, listen to what they're saying, and as importantly, look at what they're doing as shortcuts or workarounds to an issue. Make sure that you have a full understanding of the problem. You can collect data from web searches or sales teams or whole discussion forums. The one I like the most is to learn from others who have tried to solve the challenge and it didn't work out. You're trying to examine the idea from all different angles to try and get a good handle on what is going on. One expression I like is, it's always important to get enough context around an issue. People would get that. But what is equally or more important is, what is the subtext? Subtext is what no one is talking about, yet it rules everything. It can be embedded in the culture or the politics of an organization. Try and find out as much as you can. So as we use an example for level 1, maybe you wanted to maybe people experiencing stress in your organization, so you want to build a wellness application. So what you want to do is spend a week observing how employees actually manage stress. So then we go to
Okay.
level 2.
So just one, it's one to maybe I'll
Sure.
just summarize this level 1.
Yeah.
Just sorry to jump in there.
No, good.
So level 1 is about understanding the real problem,
That's right.
right?
Yep.
It's about figuring out whether by exploring to understand whether in fact that's the case and looking for ways of observing the way the products are used or whatever it is and understanding the actual customer problem.
That's
Uh,
right.
right? Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Good. I got it.
Exactly.
Okay. Next
And
next
yeah.
level.
All right. So level 2, interest validation. This slide is sharing the importance of exploring whether there's enough interest to make this a viable opportunity for your team or your organization. The intention here is to get a deeper understanding of whether your idea catches attention and can gain traction. So perhaps you'd create a video and promote online to see if people click and like, or take a one-page document that summarizes the opportunity and talk with people to get their insights. Make sure to write down and record what insights they share with you. So if you go back to this wellness center, what you would do is create a landing page and see if people sign up and indicate interest in being part of your idea.
Okay. So let
Okay.
me summarize
Sure.
again then. So to me, the second level is about whether this is a problem that's worth addressing,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then it's really about understanding um, what the market interest is, what kind of um, uh, concepts might help to solve that, all that sort of stuff. And so
Yep.
it's right. Okay. Okay. Perfect. Next
Yep.
next level.
Okay. So level 3 is the existing solution validation, right? Is it a viable option? What will make your idea more attractive, more necessary, that will move customers to you from their existing options? The one I liked is called the Frankenstein, which can follow from the landing page, right? So what did the customers say in response to your promotion? Did they like it? Did they complete the online process, or did they bail and leave it partway through? How easy was it for customers to understand and commit? Or another experiment is how many people were disappointed that they couldn't access your solution right away. So back to the Wellness Center, study how customers solve the problem today.
Yeah, that's a good one because it comes into the conversation many times in these situations where there's a favored solution or a camp within an organization that feels a certain way about things, and ultimately they may be even trying to solve a problem that doesn't really exist. Or solve
Yeah.
it in a way that's been already thought about. The other, the other broad comment I would make about this whole testing thing is this process is allowing you as an organization to capture insights and to put them somewhere where you get back at them again. Because how many times have we gone into an organization and said, well, what about this idea? Well, we tried that 5 years ago and whatever. And so how did it work? Well, it failed. Okay, why? No idea, because there's no documentation, there's nothing like that. So this is a way
Exactly.
of sort of understanding what's the environment and sort of has this been approached before? What other ways are customers solving these problems? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And what I really liked about this is it's very, I mean, as humans, we adapt to things and we are so sure with the way we do it is fine. That seeing it to change is really difficult. So we've got to be able to make sure that people are going to change to what we are offering, right? So whether it's a workaround in an organization or it's a new product or service. So that's what I really liked about this, validating it. So
Cool.
level 4 is validation of your proposed solution, right? So this is where the rubber hits the road. Does the solution actually work? So one experiment would be to do trial sales. Will people sign up for what you're offering? No legal obligation, but see the value of your solution. Or there's another experiment called Lemonade. It's to create a place for people to test and buy your product or service. And just the other day, I found somebody was testing some cool little new drink that was put out, and and it said on it, it's a limited offer. So that was what they were doing, right? This validation of their solution. So back to the wellness center, if you run a pilot with a small group of customers, see if they'll buy it and or learn from your insights. Where is their hesitation or reluctance? What's making them stop saying yes? And would they provide their contact info so you can follow up with them? The real value of the business experimentation guide is not that it helps organizations run experiments. It helps them build a system that learns faster than their competitors. Each level allows you to measure and evaluate whether to continue, modify, or stop. In the long run, these experiments are the way to go slow to go fast.
So this is something that aligns with commercialization efforts, right? It's really about having a viable product that works, that perhaps one client has accepted or whatever. And on the other side of things, this is the place where most organizations start. And
Mm.
we would say that's probably not the place to start by
Right.
building a prototype of something and putting it out there because they haven't gone through the other stages of thinking. So to me, I would just sort of summarize the experimentation guide as a mechanism to guide organizations through the thinking around new product development or new process or business development, or business process development or business models. to make sure they're asking the right questions and getting to the place where they are in a position to put together a prototype or an A/B test or whatever, and not before they've actually thought through these things. Would you agree
Yeah.
with that?
Yeah, completely. And as you and I were sharing earlier, like to me, there is no way on earth I will never ever try some new initiative without doing these experiments. I've done it the other way, and it's painful. There's never um, a bad everything works out in the long run, but it can be painful when you haven't gone through this research. And what I love about this is allowing you to say, we know why we're moving to the next step or why we're bailing, right? And that's such a huge peace of mind for people. So I like, right.
Very good. So what you're telling me that most organizations experiment, they have their way of doing it, but almost nobody does it well. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. We don't have an experimentation gap. We have a systemization gap. You can see it on the data on the slide, right? 72% of organizations report some experimentation capability, but only 7.7% report it as strong. So to me, that's a huge opportunity, right? And to repeat the insight that you provided in the opening, strong experimentation capability is 13 times more common in top performers. That's huge, right? So there's an opportunity for us if we actually start putting a process to this, that we can actually make a benefit to the organization.
So so where do companies typically start?
Generally, level four, they jump straight to building solutions without proving there's a real problem. That's not innovation, that's expensive guesswork. And, when we talk about what happens when organizations skip testing, they don't save time, they don't save money. They simply move uncertainty downstream where it becomes dramatically more expensive. And I think that's such a great insight, right? That moving something, just delaying it, actually becomes expensive if you're having to make a change. And we'll go into that a bit later about why that can be expensive. So, what's the ultimate outcome? Failed launches, abandoned transformations, employee cynicism, and loss of trust.
So why does that all happen?
Because it's so easy when people agree with an idea, and organizations confuse that if enough people agree, the idea must be good, right? But alignment is not evidence. Alignment is not validation of an idea. And what often replaces experimentation is people being confident in the PowerPoint presentation, it's internal consensus and agreement, or senior stakeholder belief that it's right. And this is the challenge with human-centered work. We need data and evidence to validate the stories and belief system. It's too easy to avoid collecting data and instead be driven by the narrative. And guess what? Experimentation challenges the narrative. Experimentation challenges the narrative, which is so important. The experimentation either validates or reveals the weaknesses in the narrative.
So let's collect this with the data. So you found that experimentation drives performance, but not always. Why?
Uh, because experimentation is a capability and it's something you have to get better with over time, but not a guarantee. It only works when innovation is a leadership priority. So leadership must fund it, they've got to prioritize it, and they have to act on the results.
And if they don't?
Then experimentation becomes a performance. Teams run tests, slides get created, nothing changes, and people learn very quickly that evidence doesn't matter.
Ha, that's that innovation theater I like to talk about. So, so you mentioned this data a few times. What does it show?
When we look specifically at innovators, organizations that already take innovation seriously, we see a clear pattern. It's a constant evaluation and understanding of a product, the competitors, the demand, the risks, etc. The I360 data tells us that four capabilities, experimentation, prototyping, pilot testing, and having an underlying efficient test methodology, are all correlated with speed to market, how quickly you can respond to a challenge or an opportunity. It also suggests the paradigm of a system. Experimentation generates evidence. Learning capabilities capture and interpret it, and that drives execution outcomes like speed and delivery. So you'll see in the learning system slide on the screen and in the circle, ideas are added, input on new ideas is gathered, clustered, hypotheses are developed, new and bigger ideas, testing, prototyping, and pilots are completed. If any part of that loop is broken, performance drops. Most organizations don't fail at experimenting, they fail at closing the learning loop. So this isn't simply a nice theory, it has a financial impact. The more systematically you experiment, the faster you execute, and the more you actually deliver.
So you talked about this a little bit before, but let's go back to the ideas concept. So why do we as organizations overvalue
Mm.
ideas?
Hmm. Because ideas are safe. Testing them isn't. The moment you test an idea, you risk proving it wrong, and that is difficult when it's an idea we've carried from the very beginning. So it's easier not to test and believe in the adage about Ford not building cars if he had asked people what they wanted, horses or cars. But the guide makes it clear. Some ideas look good in theory, but fail in reality, so you need experiments to validate them. So without experimentation, ideas pile up, decisions are opinion-based, risk increases. When you have experimentation, weak ideas die early, that's okay. Strong ideas are validated, and learning compounds and grows. One great way of explaining the difference between ideas and creativity, ideas create possibilities. That's the easy part. Experimentation creates progress, and that's the hard part.
So we're all about transformation in all an organization. So how does all this play into a transformation agenda?
Hmm. So this is where it becomes critical. Most transformations are built on plans, roadmaps, and assumptions. But let's be honest, most transformations are assumptions disguised as plans. Experimentation changes that. Hypotheses lead to tests, which leads to evidence, which leads to scaling. Transformation becomes a portfolio of experiments, not initiatives, and that dramatically reduces the risk.
So what would the hardest truth be that organizations need to hear?
Hmm. That most of what they call innovation isn't. It's activity without learning. And I would suggest that there is a huge impact on organizations when they bail on initiatives that had significant investments of time and energy from the people who work with them. And yet, because they didn't get the thinking represented in the four levels and reevaluate constantly, there is a loss of trust and respect from key employees who rightly expect an organization to have done their due diligence. Is it worth the risk and potential loss of experience and insights when people leave over poor processes around experiments? If your experiments don't change decisions, if your pilots don't produce evidence, if your ideas aren't being challenged, then you're not reducing uncertainty, you're just managing it more elegantly. And here's the part that most organizations miss. Experimentation only works if it feeds a learning system. And this is where I talked about this is the investment, right? We're at the very beginning, the investment in a learning system. I360 data examines the impact of experimentation on organizations and can see a strong conceptual linkage between experimentation and learning capabilities like automated usage analysis, which is the ability to track and evaluate how customers interact with your product and platform or service. Customer insights, what are you learning from your customers? And innovation measuring, which are the new ideas adding value. If you're not capturing and reusing what you learn, experimentation doesn't compound, it just repeats.
So just to summarize all this, the experimentation guide provides a path of questions to sort of understand the various initiatives or innovations that are going on in a particular organization, and to make sure that at each stage of development, each level of maturity, that the organization understands the core sort of issues, like in fact, is this a problem, and like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if we map that thought process against what's on the screen, which is
Yeah.
basically an ideation process, it's the I3 one that we or 3I that we use in Innovation360. You can see the flow, and
Yeah.
so you can imagine. So what happens often in organizations is they get an idea and they go execute it. And so all the value and all the iteration and all the discussion that would take place and all the other red balls on the chart wouldn't be sort of included in the discussion, and ultimately ideas that weren't what we call big ideas, because ultimately they come from iteration and discussion, wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
So right. So you're
Yeah.
the two things map to each other, and the four stages of maturity and the four discussions are really from left to right on the ideation
Yeah.
process. Right?
Yeah. I mean, you can see how you would never, the whole on the Ignite on the right-hand side, you're not doing that to every idea that comes along, right? It's going through this process of weeding out the things that aren't at this moment what you want to go forward with. Doesn't mean you won't. And the whole point is, like I always love to say to clients, your ideas, they're still there. It just you've decided at this point when you're narrowing it down and converging, you actually are saying, we're going to focus on this right now based on what we know. Things can change, as we all know, day to day. What I loved about the hypothesis part about it is that, we should be testing that all the way along because, as I just said, things change constantly. And so, if you're not really always evaluating, when somebody comes along and says, "Well, that didn't work. Why didn't it?" And you've said, "Well, we didn't see it coming." Is that really a good answer anymore? I don't know. I mean, if you're testing all the time, then I think you're going to be able to kind of even the hypothesis, extreme possibilities. You go, it seems like silliness that would ever happen, but you don't know that. That's what we're finding now in today's 2026 world.
Yeah. The other observation I would make would be that this sort of flow and thought process applies to initiatives that fall within H1, H2, and H3. In
Yeah,
effect, right?
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the H3 is where you don't have much data. You don't know if an idea is going to work. That's high, it's not a timeline. It's just saying we don't know much yet. And then the H2 is when you really want to find to get, well, we think this has some legs, so let's get some data behind it. And then before we move it to H1, which is, hey, we're ready to implement and we're pretty sure we're pretty sure we're going to make money on this. So this is what I love about, this whole learning system. It takes you through H3 to H1.
Excellent. Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about what leaders should do differently to not fall into these traps.
Mhm. So I think there's four things that leaders need to focus on, right? First is start funding evidence. Like that's something that's probably unheard of. Fund the evidence, not ideas. Too many organizations allocate resources based on enthusiasm, seniority, or the quality of the presentation, right? Instead, funding should follow learning. If an initiative can demonstrate what it has learned, how assumptions have been tested, and what evidence has been generated, it earns the right to receive additional investment. Second thing would be to build real experimentation capability. Experimentation doesn't happen by accident. It requires capabilities such as prototyping, pilot testing, efficient test methodology. So the organizations that outperform don't simply have more ideas, they have better systems for testing and refining those ideas. The third thing would be to make innovation a genuine organizational priority. I always think that everybody should see that they're part of the innovation process, right? Whether they just see that we could do something a little bit better, they're contributing to innovation. So our analysis shows that experimentation alone is not enough. Experimentation becomes significantly more effective when it is paired with innovation priority. This means that leadership must allocate resources, create governance, support evidence-based decisions, and ensure that experimentation influences what gets scaled and what gets stopped. Otherwise, experimentation becomes an activity rather than a driver of performance. The fourth thing would be build a learning culture and not just an innovation culture. The organizations that learn fastest outperform those that simply generate the most ideas. That means creating an environment where assumptions are challenged, evidence is valued over opinion, learning is captured and shared, and teams are rewarded for reducing uncertainty. Because ultimately, experimentation is not about being right. It's about learning quickly enough to make better decisions.
So one of the other linkages in this subject matter is the data that we collect in the survey. And what as a bit of a data guy, it fascinates me that we can measure each of these things and we can look at the correlations between the capabilities that Deborah is talking about and the specifics of each of these four actions. So in
Yeah.
dialogue with clients, you can actually bring out proof points and talk to them about these things.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And I also find that, it just because you're not strong at something doesn't mean you can't be better at it. It's being aware of the fact that this is something that you might want to make stronger. But I also say learn from the other things that you do really well because there's a learning that transfers over to something else. So if we can do this well, then how do we take that and apply that to something else that we need to strengthen? That's okay, right? So understanding capabilities can shift. It's just it takes time to develop them.
Great. So, bottom line, I guess, is a whole lot less PowerPoint and my famous innovation theater concept,
Mhm.
and more learning and more proof.
Yeah, exactly. The organizations that consistently outperform aren't necessarily more creative. They're better at learning. I know you've heard me say that a lot, but it is about a learning organization. And experimentation is how that learning happens.
Cool. So what I'd like to do is to ask anybody in our audience today if they have any questions that they want to take a run at answering. We'll promise to do the best we can. And please put them into the chat. One thing I will also do is, oops. So you'll notice that up on the screen, I think, is our the little eye from the owl peeping out on the left-hand side. If you take down these codes, then you can have access to two of the courses on our My360 global platform. The URL is there. I will also stick it into the chat. But you'll notice that. Let me make sure I get it here. You'll notice that there are two different courses. One is Business Experiments, a guide to how and why, and non-linear ideation, a guide to how and why. One is more broadly covering the concept of experimentation. The other is the business experimentation guide itself. And I will now try and put that into the.
And I will say in that business experimentation guide, it is really well laid out in helping people figure out how to implement it. It talks about time to make it happen, the cost to make it happen, lots of suggestions. It's on every single one of those 44 um, experiments. It's really a great, valuable tool.
Okay, let me just take a look here. We got here. Can you walk through the highlights of a real life example of how a learning experimentation process worked out for an organization? Want to take a run at that, Deborah?
Yeah, so I have a friend of mine who's actually done a lot of research on this, and she was sharing a story about Michelin Innovation Center. And what they did from a leadership perspective is when somebody was charged with a responsibility to innovate something, whatever, they had directors or senior leaders who were tied to their success. So it meant that they were saying, I care about this, right? So it's obviously directing my respect within the organization or my compensation on how well you do. So that would mean that this testing all the way through and experimentation they're invested in your success, or in other words, they want you to be successful, but they're not going to want you to waste your time not doing something well. So that linkage of having senior management tied to the success of people who are risking and trying, I thought was just a brilliant example of leadership. And my friend's book is coming out in English in a few months, and I'll be sure to share it with you, Gerry, because it's a really insightful research book around innovation.
Frederick made a comment on the scientific method. Thank you, Frederick. Um, any suggestion? Oh, so Sylvie, do we find examples of experimentation process in your book? Um, Not in as detailed as this discussion, nor as you will find in the courseware that I directed you to. There is a deep discussion of three ideation approaches: 3I, classic, and 5I. And they touch on iteration and like that, but not quite as specific as the experimentation stuff. You'll also notice um, when you look into, I'll give you a little peek at this to work here. This is actually out of the experimentation guide, so there's some of the examples of the experiments that are in it. You'll find that information, and you'll find a copy of the experimentation guide available as a resource as part of those two courses.
Can I tackle that question about convincing a supervisor?
Yeah, go for it.
So if you know, if that supervisor realizes that, most ideas kind of fall by the wayside because they haven't gone through the experimentation. And they can actually get better outcomes by going through this process because they've learned to just say, hey, we're stopping. We're not going to continue on, or we're going to modify it, or we're going to say, yeah, we feel there's still enough reason to go on. They can prove that this is actually going to be better for them over time. And so they're going to be, I don't want to say, they're going to be the hero by actually saying we're prepared to examine whether or not this idea has got traction and the ability to go forward and be willing to say no. But also maybe it's a yes, but we've thought it through. And so I think anybody young in their career, this is, if they can learn the skill set and learning how to identify the real challenge that's out there, it's going to be a great tool to have. When you're up against AI, this is the skill set you want to have.
So another question from Frederic. Do you run experiments to validate desirability, feasibility, and viability across the innovation process, or is there a logic to where you test and what? So yes, so both actually. So there's two ways of using the experimentation package or guide. And it actually is a fairly big document that has all the testing and how you do it in it. One is to respond to a specific sort of question or issue, or need to do a prototype or what kind of prototype and like that. And that can be directed at a particular problem at a particular time. So the guide can be useful for that. I think more robustly, the guide is a good way of looking at a particular innovation initiative or sort of problem set and defining where you stand and how effective your thinking is around the issue, which is why we sort of refer to it as a maturity scale. So level one is really about really getting your arms around the real problem. It's the why. And we talk about all the time about programs going forward without a deep understanding of the why. And what that's about is sort of understanding that this thing exists. What pain points do we need to be addressing? You know, and so in that context, the testing is about building a more robust view at each of the stages, or assessing whether or not you have a robust enough view at each of the stages, and so therefore you sort of go through the thinking and do some testing and experimentation at each of the levels, or you might bypass them, but not automatically go to level four, but bypass the deep work in each of the sessions by, in effect, confirming that you have enough of an understanding and you've embraced the situation. It's very similar to the process around a pitch deck. So do you have your story right? Do you know what it is you're trying to do and why? Do you have you thought through the various alternatives? Often projects and life goes on because people forget some of the alternatives. So that's what scenario planning comes into the conversation, perhaps. So it's really about understanding where you stand, and if you can deal with it. So just to confirm, you can, or to summarize, you can use the guide as a way of addressing a particular issue or question, and the guide will give you some suggestions in terms of the kind of tests you can do, or you can use the guide as a way of building a robust understanding at the beginning or any other time of the initiative to make sure that you've answered the appropriate questions or you've embraced and understood the underlying problem and how you're going to address it. And the customers actually, for example, actually want this thing, because sometimes that happens too. Or organizations move forward, they put something forward, and the clients don't want it. And so it's a really cool product. It's on the shelf, nobody buys it.
And Gerry, would you be okay if I tackled Frederick's comment about,
Go for it.
yeah,
No, go for
so it goes back to that. So when I'm doing the research, one example was a COO had this great idea, and he had tons of great people working on it. They were developing it. Problem was they forgot to check in with the CEO who was responsible for strategy, and the CEO canned it. Well, and that tied into the comment about what are you losing when people are just so discouraged by all the work and energy they put into it because something, as you said, somebody else can kill the idea. So and it tied into the comment made about what's the subtext that's going on. Like, if you're not understanding in that level one, you can get all the context you want, but the subtext, what's the political situation? Who makes these decisions could kill your idea, and you have to know those things, or you're fighting a bit of a lost cause. So that subtext is. I remember when somebody gave me that was a professor from McMaster University. He said, "Context rules, but or context is king, but subtext rules." And I loved it. I thought that was brilliant. So hope
Cool.
that helps.
So any last questions? Please take note of the sign-in information. You'll have to register, but really that's just your email, and I think that's it, actually, your email. And it'll get you into the learning center. Within there, you'll see all the different courses. These two courses with that code, which is only available to you until the middle of July. You can sign up and do the course. If you really think it's cool, you can get yourself a certificate for your LinkedIn, which a lot of people like as well, as sort of an indication of the completion of the course. Any other last questions? Peter, good to ensure that experimentation is not confused with analysis, especially in the context of organizational perception of paralysis by analysis. Oh, absolutely. Experimentation is a bias for action, and everybody loves that. I couldn't agree more, Peter. For me, Frederick, any examples on ways? Thank you, Frederick. Dave, any examples on ways to test a product with customers? Yes, I think there are some in the document.
And I know Dave, and he can do the course and he'll figure it all out. So he'll probably do all 44 examples. Yeah.
Yeah, so the um, one that popped in my mind isn't with customers, it's kind of including customers, but we focus on anthropology a lot. And so the question really is, how do customers use, or how could they use the new product, but how do they use the existing stuff, and the understanding that you get from that. And there's all sorts of examples of products that were launched without a consideration of how the customer might use it. Yeah, so that's an example, I think, of some of the stuff that you can do with customers. And if they're busy, you watch them. What people in the sort of operations and transportation world do is they ride along with the trucks, see how the trucks work, how it works, what happens when there's a problem. And so that's a really good way of doing in the trenches, so to speak, to sort of observe and see what's going on, and then with that either test something as a pilot or a prototype, or observe the existing process to understand how it works, and therefore how it might work in the future. Excellent. So with that,
Sorry, would
I
it be safe? Sorry, one quick question. Would it be safe to say that if people wanted to, they'll get the video if they've on this, they'll get the video. If they want to share that video with others, they can also sign up on these courses, right? So we can help spread the word about what experimentation is all about.
they can until February or July the 14th.
Right, July
Yes.
14th. Yes, right.
So
Okay, good.
for sure, yeah, it's an open invite. You need the code there. So GPNL1, for example, is an example. So one last final question, Deborah. So maybe it's an easy one. Can you summarize, sort of in a couple of sentences, your sort of views on all this?
Sure. So again, strong experimentation acts as a defining capability. It's not a supporting one. It's actually very important. And the biggest risk facing most organizations isn't experimenting too much. It's scaling something that was never tested. So in a nutshell, I would say ideas create possibilities. Evidence creates confidence. Experimentation creates results.
Great. Well, that's a great place to end. And thank you all for attending and your good questions and sort of activity. Look for registration to our next session, which will be in the fall, with Tord Thunman, who's one of our gold partners out of Sweden. and his focus will be on innovating in isolation. And so it's really about um, why organizations tend to be insular in their innovation efforts as opposed to reaching out and engaging other stakeholders. So there's some really cool data, and Tord is a very thoughtful character, and we'll have a really good session. We've sort of had conversations about it already. So, everyone, thanks again for joining us. Deborah, thank you very much for all the work you did to put into this, and for your very thought-provoking words on experimentation. I look
Great.
forward to seeing you all at some point. And thanks for all from all over the world, including Peter, who was up all night.
No, he's camping in Australia. He's like, he said it's now 11 p.m. I love the fact that he was trying to do it from a campsite.
Have a good one, all. Thank you very much.
Okay, take care. Bye.